And when the Prophet ﷺ wants to completely abolish something, he attributes it to Jahiliyyah, to the days of ignorance. Why? Because Jahiliyyah is this lump of kufr, injustice, institutionalized racism, tribalism, right? Female infanticide. It's just this package. And the Prophet ﷺ wants to completely do away with it. So we find even the famous story, because those are mainly tribalism, nationalism, so on and so forth. The famous story of the argument between Bilal radiallahu anhu and Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu, where Abu Dharr made a racist comment to Bilal. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you still have in you the traits of Jahiliyyah. These are the traits of the days of ignorance. Now here's the thing, if the Prophet ﷺ, went to such measures to abolish this and called this, a trait, a feature of the days of ignorance, did the Prophet ﷺ have hope that this would go away? He had hope, ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ said that it would always remain. And this is a very powerful hadith because it is prophetic in every way. It's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ says that there are 4 traits of the days of ignorance that will always remain in the Ummah. 4 traits of the days of ignorance that will always remain in the Ummah. Number 1, he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, boasting about one's ancestors' deeds and virtues. So you boast about what your fathers and your forefathers did. And you use that as a means of gaining superiority, right? So, even today when you listen to people talk about America, right? Or America, right? What is it? Our fathers came here, they were the ones that did this, and so on and so forth. There's this concept of, although it's more decorated, all right? But it's still, our forefathers established this land, they did this, they did that, and so on and so forth. And it happens in the Muslim world as well, obviously. All right, and in a much less decorated way, in a much uglier way. But the point is that there is this concept of boasting about your ancestors' deeds and so on and so forth. And that is a cover-up for racism. When people do that, that's a cover-up for racism. The second one, the Prophet ﷺ says, defaming another person on the basis of his lineage or where he came from. So you defame someone on the basis of his origin. That's the cheapest shot in the world that you can take. Why? Because you can't undo your race or your lineage. And that's why, subhanAllah, this part of the hadith is very much so, it's very encompassing. It's very widely encompassing. Why? Because there are rules in Islam, for example, for a child that was born out of zina. That child doesn't have to pay for the crime of his parents. Right? So your parents are terrible people. You come from a country that's a third world country and that has, terrible reputation in the world. That should not in any way judge or be a standard of judging your character or your own deeds and your own accomplishments. And there's nothing you can do to undo that, because you'll always be the person from that country and from those parents and so on and so forth. So the Prophet ﷺ said that would remain. He said, ﷺ, thirdly, seeking to be given rain by means of the stars. Horoscopes, superstitions, and so on and so forth. People will still continue. Though again, it's a lot more disguised now. It's not called polytheism or so on and so forth, but it still is. It's still a form of idolatry and superstition and so on and so forth. The fourth thing the Prophet ﷺ says, niyaha, over the dead. Niyaha is wailing, over the dead. Now, niyaha, from an Islamic perspective, does not refer to crying. Crying over the dead is fine. But it's people that would smack themselves and scream and shout. Also, there are set rituals at the time of death. So the Prophet ﷺ said we used to consider, or Jarir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu says we used to consider people that would gather for food and gather with the family of the deceased as a form of niyaha. That was a form of wailing, which is in almost every Muslim culture today. Gathering with the family for a set number of days, serving a particular type of coffee, eating a particular type of food, reciting a certain number of this or so. That's niyaha. So the Prophet ﷺ says, no matter what you do, this is going to exist in the Ummah. SubhanAllah, how prophetic. Because Rasulullah ﷺ is not saying this will exist amongst mankind. It will exist in the Ummah. With the Quran, with the Sunnah, with all the proofs and evidences. These are 4 things that will never be taken away. So racism will always exist. It has always existed. Tribalism has always existed. It will continue to exist. But that doesn't mean that we don't fight it.